Hey friends, welcome back to my Pottery at Home series. This is a series I've created to answer some of your most frequently asked questions and to give you all the information that you need to know to make pottery at home. So as you can see today, we are in my kiln room, and that's because I'm going to be talking to you about how you can install your very own kiln into your home. So let's get into it. So before we get into the tips, I'm going to answer a question that I get a lot, and that is what kiln I have. So this is a Rode 50-liter kiln. It's called like an Eco Top. And as you can see, it's a very small kiln. So Rode is a really great kiln manufacturer that's made here in Germany. However, I'm not necessarily recommending them in this video. The reason I have a Rode kiln is because I found this one used. There's loads of great kiln manufacturers out there. So besides Rode, I've also used and had great experience with Nabatha. Basically, if you want to get yourself a kiln, you want to go to a proper ceramic supplier because they'll probably be able to guide you into getting a good quality kiln. Don't just go online and type in, buy kiln. Go to a proper ceramics manufacturer and ideally go to the store and talk to them about it so they can kind of give you advice about what would suit you. But worst case scenario, at least go to their website and see what kiln brands they're offering there, because I can't speak for every kiln that's manufactured out in this world. I will warn you that ceramics has become increasingly popular lately, and that's caused a lot of sketchy businesses to get involved and manufacture things like wheels and kilns that are not as high quality as we expect our machines to be. Just a little heads up. Okay, so now that I've told you about my kiln, let's back up and talk about kilns in general. So there's loads of different types of kilns, and they're basically split up into what is the heat source. So in my kiln, I have an electric kiln, therefore electricity is the heat source. There's also wood fire kilns, gas fire kilns, pit fires, and I think that's pretty much it. But the most common type of kiln that hobby potters up to professional potters have are electric kilns. And that's because electric kilns are just easier to have, to maintain, to do all sorts of things. In my opinion anyway. I'm sure other people have different opinions. But it's definitely what I would recommend for a beginning potter, unless you really have someone who can guide you through the process of firing a gas kiln or an anagama kiln. So the first thing you need to think about when you are purchasing your electric kiln is the electricity source. I heard someone say once that kilns are basically like toasters on steroids. They're really not that complicated. However, they use a lot of electricity. And so some kilns, namely the larger ones, require a higher voltage electrical line. So that's the main reason that I have a small kiln right now, is because this kiln actually works with a 220 volt, which is the standard voltage here in Europe. So this little baby just plugs straight into a normal outlet, believe it or not, and it works just great. However, if and when I'm going to get a larger kiln, I'm going to need to get an electrician in to install a high voltage electrical line in here to fire a larger kiln. Because this is pretty much the maximum capacity that I've seen in normal 220 volt plugs. I'm pretty sure I don't think that you can get any bigger than this. So yeah, that's definitely something to think about if you are purchasing a kiln. You might also need to factor in the cost of an electrician installing an extra line. Probably also checking your fuse box to make sure that your house can support a kiln. Yeah, I could tell you a story here about an old studio that I used to work in that didn't actually have enough electricity to support a kiln. If you want to hear that story, let me know down below, but let's move on. So actually, before I move on, let me show you. So this is just a normal standard European plug, and then I also have it plugged into a electricity meter here that tells me how much voltage I use. This is just because I calculate my firing costs as an expense in my business, but yeah, that's the setup. Okay, so let's talk about kiln safety. So I don't want to freak you out, but kilns have been known to cause house fires. This is just a fact. That doesn't mean that it's common, but it's something that you should know. And it can be avoided with the following safety tips. Okay, first up, you want at least ½ meter of space around your kiln that separates it from the wall. And within this ½ meter space, there should be nothing flammable. And this, for obvious reasons, is so things don't get set on fire. Not that your kiln is going to start shooting out sparks or anything, but imagine if like a draft comes in and you have a piece of paper lying there and it just gets pushed up against the wall of a kiln. This could ignite and cause a fire. So I'm not saying don't have anything in your kiln room that is flammable. I have a wooden shelf, I've got a notebook over there with some paper, but everything is kind of contained and not like loosely flying around and far enough from my kiln that a little breeze is not going to push it into my kiln. Okay, so second is you want a solid, stable floor. So with this, I'm basically thinking about people who are putting their kilns out on a back porch or something like that, or like uneven ground. Most kilns, this one included, have wheels at the bottom. It's because they're really, really heavy and they do occasionally need to get moved. But you don't want a kiln that is 1200 degrees rolling across the room. You can't stop that, you cannot touch that. So maybe this is a no-brainer, but definitely want to have your kiln on a solid floor. This is also so that it doesn't roll into a wooden shelf or something flammable. Another thing to keep in mind is you never, ever, ever want to set anything on top of your kiln. So when the lid is down, it kind of looks like a table, right? You know, it'd be very handy to just set things on top. This is obviously a fire hazard, and it's also not very good for your bricks to be putting too much weight on your kiln lid. I do dry pots on top of my kiln. I know it's probably not good for my kiln, but I do it anyway because it just really helps with my workflow. But in general, you do want to avoid putting too much weight on top of your kilns because the bricks are quite fragile, they're expensive, and they're a huge pain to replace. Okay, and then the last thing I do want to encourage you to do is talk to an electrician when you are installing your kiln. Just have them do a little checkup. As I mentioned before, make sure that your fuse box is able to support the kiln. I know some old houses may have old electricity installed. This house is from the 80s and the electricity has never been updated, so that's pretty good, right? But if your house is much older than that, you might need to think about getting a new electrical line put in for your kiln if your electricity is outdated. And you know, just make sure that everything with your fuse box is modernized, everything's looking good, because that's also a place where a potential fire could break out. So just have an electrician make sure that, you know, everything's set up well, the switch will flip if the fuse gets overloaded. This is just something that you want to do just to give yourself peace of mind. Make sure that everything's looking good. Okay, and then when you are running your kiln, I also want to encourage you to set up some sort of ventilation system. So it can be like the vent that I have here, and I'll explain how this works in a second, but it can also be, for example, if you have your kiln in a shed in your backyard, I would definitely consider that vented enough, assuming that you're not working in the space when the kiln is running and you like air it out afterwards. I would also consider a ventilation system something where there's a significant draft going through. So in my old studio, for example, we had the kiln here and then we had two windows on either side that we can open up. And what this would do is, because the kiln would heat up the room, it would sort of create like a wind system in the room so that it would like pull in fresh air and then the kiln air would go out the window. So it would basically create this draft and it just pushed all the fumes out of the window. And of course, at this time, there was no one in the studio because we were firing overnight, that by morning, all of that air had been circulated through so that the air in the studio was just fine to work in. So all three of these things I would consider ventilation systems. It just depends on what you can accommodate in your space. But in this space, it's just one closed room in my basement. So we have a window to one side and right behind you is the door. So I needed to set up some system that would take all the fumes and push them out the window. So all kilns have an inlet and an outlet. So the inlet is typically on the bottom. Mine is right down here. I just leave it open at all times so I get this good air ventilation. And then the outlet is here. So all of the fumes come out of here, and because hot air rises, it instantly drifts up into here. And then as the hot air goes up and up and up, it basically creates like a vacuum effect. It creates a draft where it starts to actually pull the fumes up so that not very much actually gets released into this air. And the reason that they designed it this way is because the fumes then can kind of intermingle with the air. So it's not just the fumes getting pulled up, but it's also a little bit of fresh air too, so that what comes out the other side is not like pure kiln fumes. So with these vents, I was told that the tube needs to go straight up about 1 meter to get this proper vacuum going, and then it can make a turn. But you always want to have it angled slightly upward all the way out so that no air gets trapped basically. And then what I can do, so right now because I'm not firing, I have the window closed and I just have it hooked up to the ceiling. But what I can do when I'm firing is open it up. And I have a little hook out here that's, you know, connected to the grate above, and then all the fumes get pushed up and go outside. And I know that because this amazing, lucky miracle that hot air rises, it's just gonna keep going up and it's not gonna get trapped in this little area here and find its way back in. Of course, it's not completely airtight. That's also why I'm not working in this room when the kiln is running. And I do leave this window open for like 24 hours or so after I'm firing, just to get the air good. But you can really smell the kiln fumes, like you notice when they're there, and the air in here is great with this setup. So I'm really happy with it. So that's pretty much all I have for you today. So next week, we're going to be going over how you actually fire the kiln. We're going to be going over a bisque fire, and then later on, I'll teach you about glaze firing. But if you've been watching this video and you've decided, well, maybe I'm not ready to have my own kiln, I'd rather rent one, well, I have good news for you. I have a recent video that's all about the process of renting a kiln, where you can look for a kiln rental, how to ask, some basic things that you need to know about how a kiln operates to make this whole process of renting as smooth as possible. So definitely go check out that video if you are interested in that topic. Otherwise, that's it for me today. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, friends.